在座嘅委員咧係
Members, please take your seats. We said we had a break of 10 minutes, so we need to resume our meeting. Are there other members outside? Right. We now deal with, just now, Mr. Gary Fan submitted 39 39 amendments. We have checked them. There were repetitions, and some were in a series of previous motions. With regard to a series of motions, I believe there should be some restrictions on that. At present, I prefer to adopt a lenient approach so that we can deal with the motion directly. Otherwise, if we are to enforce then we may have to argue over a long period of time. And we also need to make a good use of our time. I would like to know whether other members would like to move any more amendments. Or are we just having, are we to have this just 104? Mr. Chan and Mr. Gary Fan said that they are preparing other motions, further amendments or motions. Ms. Ann Chang, we are dealing with this agenda item and we are voting on proposed amendments. We are dealing with the motion. We're dealing with the motions. While we are dealing with motions, can they continue to move more motions? The so-called notice, there is no restriction with regard to notice. Now we are dealing with the motions. We are voting on the motions, and there are new motions. Under 32A, there is no special interpretation. If there is no interpretation, but it's common sense. Please read 32A. Ms. Chang. We have to deal with number 0056. The majority of the members are of the view that since there is the PowerPoint, there is the projection, we don't print out the hard copies. The committee agrees to deal with Mr. Fan's motion under 32A number, and the motion number is 0056. Chairman, I claim a division. The bell will ring for 1 minute. Mr. Fan, please read out your motion. According to Rule 32A of the PWSC procedure, I, Gary Fan, move the following motion, seconded by Mr. Albert Chan. We urge the administration to take away half of the refuse collection bins in the coming 12 months to follow the example of Taiwan and Korea in order to reduce incentive for creating refuse before expanding the SCNT landfill. Those in favor, please raise their hands. Albert Chan, Kenneth Chan, and Gary Fan, 3. Those against, please raise their hands. Those who are against is Alice Wong Kok King, Leung Chi Chang, Tam Yu Chung, Chan Kin Po, Elizabeth Katz, Chan Han Pan, Chan Kam Lam, Yip Kok Kim, and Chang, Chan Ha Kan, Frankie Yik, and James Tian. Any abstention, please? 3 for, 13 against. The motion, no abstention. The motion is negatived. The next motion, number 57. This committee agrees to deal with motion number 57, moved by Mr. Gary Fan under 32A. Chairman, I claim a division. The bell ring for 1 minute. According to Rule 32A of PWSC procedure, I, Gary Fan, move the following motion, seconded by Mr. Albert Chan, in view of the expansion of SCNT landfill will cut 10,038 trees. The PWSC urged the administration to replant 4,000 trees as compensation after the project has started.
Those in favor, please raise their hands. Those for, Mr. Albert Chan, Dr. Kenneth Chan, Mr. Gary Fan, 3. Those against, please raise their hands. Those against, Ms. Alice Mack, Mr. Wong Kok Heng, Mr. Leung Chi Chung, Mr. Tam Yu Chung, Mr. Chan Kam Lam, Mr. Chan Han Pan, Mr. Ip Kok Him, Dr. Chung Lai Wan, Dr. Elizabeth Quat, Mr. Chan Hak Kan, Mr. Frankie Yik. Any abstention? 3 for, 11 against, no abstention. The question is negatived. Next question. This committee agrees to handle motion 58 moved by Mr. Gary Fan under Rule 32A. Chairman, I claim a division. The bell will ring for 1 minute. In accordance with Rule 32A of the PWSC procedure, I, Gary Fan, move this motion, seconded by Mr. Albert Chan. The extension of the central landfill will lead to the felling of 10,380 trees. This committee urges the government to, before the start of the extension work, replant 2,000 trees in Cheung Kwan O District as a mitigation measure for environmental protection. Mr. Chairman, all these motions should be collated together. These motions only vary in terms of the number of trees. It's really meaningless. Mr. Chairman, you have to make a ruling. I've heard your view. You have to handle my view. We are handling motion 58. That is motion 58, moved by Gary Fan. Those in favor, please raise their hands. Mr. Albert Chan, Mr. Gary Fan, 2. Those against, please raise their hands. Those against, Ms. Alice Mack, Mr. Wong Kok Heng, Mr. Leung Chi Chung, Mr. Tam Yu Chung, Mr. Chan Kam Lam, Mr. Chan Han Pan, Dr. Elizabeth Quat, Mr. Ip Kok Him, Dr. Chung Lai Wan, Mr. Chan Hak Kan, Mr. Frankie Yik. Any abstention? Dr. Kenneth Chan, 1. 2 for, 11 against, 1 abstention. This question is negatived. We now move to discuss the question of whether or not this committee should handle motion 59 as moved by Mr. Gary Fan under Rule 32A. Chairman, I claim a division. The bell will ring for 1 minute. Sorry, the clerk reminded me that this is identical with motion 004. Well, not just this motion is identical with the previous motion which has been handled. Next, motion 60. Mr. Gary Fan, how many more? In accordance with 32A of the PWSC procedure, Mr. Gary Fan has moved this motion, motion 60. I claim a division, Chairman. All right. Mr. Gary Fan has moved 49 additional motions, and we still have 44 to go. Please read it out. Thank you, Chairman. In accordance with Rule 32A of the PWSC procedure, I, Gary Fan, move this motion, which is seconded by Mr. Albert Chan. This committee urges the government to, before extending the southeast anti-landfill, undertake to, in the next 48 months, expand the eco-product responsibility scheme to cover all plastic containers, packaging materials, beverage containers, rubber tires, wood, and batteries, etc. Those in favor, please raise their hands. Those for Mr. Albert Chan, Dr. Fernando Chan, Dr. Kenneth Chan, and Mr. Gary Fan. 4. Those against, please raise their hands. Those against? Mr. Tam Yu Chung, Mr. Wong Kok Heng, Dr. Elizabeth Quad, Ms. Alice Mack, Mr. Chen Han Pan, Mr. Chen Kam Lam, Mr. Ip Kok Him, Dr. Chang Lai Wan, Mr. Chan Hak Kan, Mr. Michael Tan, Mr. Frankie Yik. Any abstention? 4 for, 12 against, no abstention. This question is negatived. I have a question. I want to go back to the previous motion. I have a question. That is motion 60. Its nature is identical with other motions. 38 months became 48 months. If in every motion the number of months is different, are we going to vote on 10,000 motions? Motions of a similar nature should be voted upon once. These are frivolous motions. Mr. Michael Tan, I do have my views about motions in relation to figures, but the situation has not worsened to an extent as mentioned by you. So in future, we will handle this matter in relation to different figures in different motions. I hope that the President will discuss this so that we have a clear policy to follow in future. We are now on motion 61. 61? The question is whether or not this committee agrees to handle motion 61 moved by Mr. Gary Fan under Rule 32A. I claim a division. The bell will ring for 1 minute. In accordance with Rule 32A of the PWSC procedure, I, Gary Fan, move this motion, which is seconded by Mr. Albert Chan. This committee urges the government to, in the next 6 months, implement a landfill injunction to prohibit segregated materials being sent to landfills before extending Southeast New Territories landfill. Those in favor, please raise their hands. Those for Mr. Albert Chan, Dr. Fernando Chan, Dr. Kenneth Chan, and Mr. Gary Fan. 4. Those against, please raise their hands. Those against, Ms. Alice Mack, Mr. Wong Kok Heng, Mr. Leung Chi Chang, Mr. Tam Yu Chung, Mr. Chen Kim Paul, Dr. Elizabeth Quad, Mr. Chan Han Pan, Mr. Tony Tse, Mr. Ip Kok Him, Mr. Chan Hak Kan, Dr. Chang Lai Wan, Mr. Frankie Yik. Any abstention? 4 for, 13 against. The question is negatived. Next, the question is whether or not this committee agrees to handle motion 62 moved by Mr. Gary Fan under Rule 32A. I claim a division, Chairman. The bell will ring for 1 minute. Mr. Chairman, in accordance with Rule 32A of the PWSC procedure, I, Gary Fan, move this motion, which is seconded by Mr. Albert Chan. This committee urges the government to implement a landfill prohibition order in the next 12 months to prohibit segregated materials being sent to landfills before extending Southeast New Territories landfill.
Those
in favor, please raise their hands. Those in favor, Mr. Albert Chan, Dr. Fernando Cheung, Dr. Kenneth Chan, Mr. Gary Fan. 4. Those against, please raise their hands. Those against, Ms. Alice Mack, Mr. Wong Kok Heng, Mr. Leung Chi Cheung, Mr. Tam Yu Chung, Mr. Chan Han Pan, Mr. Chan Kim Po, Mr. Tony Tse, Mr. Ip Kok Him, Dr. Chang Lai Wan, Mr. Chan Hak Kan, Mr. Frankie Yik. Any abstention? 4 for, 12 against. This question is negatived. Next question, whether this committee agrees to handle motion 63 moved by Mr. Gary Fan under Rule 32A. Chairman, I claim a division. The bell will ring for 1 minute. In accordance with 32A of the PWSC procedure, I, Gary Fan, move this motion, seconded by Mr. Albert Chan. This committee urges the government to implement a landfill prohibition order in the next 24 months to prohibit segregated materials being sent to landfills before extending Southeast NT landfill. Well, we had a similar motion. Now here we don't have a specific month or date. This is something to do with differences in figures. There's no time restriction. So how can you allow him to change his motions just with differences in the time frame, say 12 months, 24 months? So, Mr. Chairman, please note this. Mr. Chairman, time may be a very important factor in the implementation of government policies. So 1 year, 2 years, 3 years may be of significance. Sorry, time's up. Those in favor, please raise their hands. Mr. Albert Chan, Dr. Fernando Cheung, Dr. Kenneth Chan, Mr. Gary Fan. 4. Those against, please raise their hands. Those against, Ms. Alice Mak, Mr. Wong Kok Heng, Mr. Tam Yu Chung, Mr. Chan Kim Po, Dr. Elizabeth Claude, Mr. Chan Han Pan, Mr. Tony Tse, Mr. Ip Kok Him, Dr. Chang Lai Wan, Mr. Chan Hak Kan, Mr. Frankie Yik. Well, what about Mr. Ip Kok Him's question? Have you made a ruling? I said much earlier that I do have views on these differences in figures only. Now I'm adopting a more lenient approach. As I said, I discussed with the LegCo President and the Finance Committee Chairman so that clearer instructions can be given to us. Well, you're repeating yourself. Mr. Ip Kok Him raised a new point. This motion, well, can you explain your ruling? Why is it that you can allow him to continue like this? I don't think we need a discussion at this juncture. Mr. Chairman, you've made a ruling. Don't you have to explain your ruling? Four for, 11 against. Mr. Chairman, you have to convince us. I think it's better for you to ask the movers of the motions. The chairman is only to chair meetings. Mr. Chairman, apart from handling meetings, you have to make reasonable rulings. Sorry. Next. The next question is whether or not this committee agrees to handle motion 64 moved by Mr. Gary Fan under Rule 32A. Chairman, I claim a division. The bell will ring for 1 minute. In accordance with Rule 32A of the PWSC procedure, I, Gary Fan, move this motion, which is seconded by Mr. Albert Chan. This committee urges the government to, in the next 36 months, impose a landfill prohibition order to prohibit segregated materials being sent to landfills before extending the sent landfill. I can respond to Mr. Michael Tan's question. The government, Mr. Wong Kam Sing, is also using a time frame to bundle the 3 landfills and 1 incinerator together to force us to make a decision. In the past, the government has been acting too slowly. So when deciding on public policies, when to implement the policies and so forth, determination to handle waste is important. I have to respond to Mr. Michael Tan's doubts and Mr. Him's comments. Time is a fundamental factor in terms of policies. I'm chairing the meeting. Those in favor, please raise their hands. Those in favor, Mr. Albert Chan, Dr. Fernando Cheung, Dr. Kenneth Chan, Mr. Gary Fan, 4. Those against, please raise their hands. Those against, Ms. Alice Mack, Mr. Wong Kok Heng, Mr. Tam Yo Chung, Mr. Chen Han Pan, Dr. Elizabeth Quat, Mr. Chan Kim Po, Mr. Tony Dare, Mr. Ip Kok Him, Dr. Chang Lai Wan, Mr. Chan Hak Ken, Mr. Frankie Yik. Any abstention? 4 for, 11 against. This question is negative. Just now, the clerk would like to clarify that for motion 61, there are certain errors. 4 for, 12 against, not 13. Just now, the clerk made a wrong counting. There's no abstention. The result is the same. The question was negative. This is a clarification on the figures. Mr. Chairman, you asked me to read Rule 32A, but Rule 32A makes it very clear that each member can only move 1 motion. Dr. Chang Lai Wan, is it really 1? We've been discussing this many times in the past few years. Does a motion mean 1? It's not for me to explain. Why not? This had been discussed in the Electoral Council many times. I've asked the lawyers, it's very clear, each member can only move 1 motion. I just called the lawyers to ask. They told me it depends on the ruling of the chairman. If your comment is so good, please speak to the president. This question is whether or not this committee agrees to handle motion 65 moved by Mr. Gary Fan. I claim a division, Chairman. The division bell will ring for 1 minute. Dr. Chang Lai Wan, without the consent of the chairman, please do not speak from your seat. Those in favor, please raise your hands. Those in favor, Mr. Albert Chan, Mr. James To, Dr. Kenneth Chan, Dr. Helena Wong, Mr. Gary Fan, 5. Is it 6? Kenneth Chan, are you in favor? 6. Should be 6. Mr. Albert Chan, Dr. Fernando Cheung, Mr. James To, Dr. Helena Wong, Mr. Gary Fan. Those against, please raise their hands. Those against, Ms. Alice Mack, Mr. Wong Kok Heng, Mr. Tam Yo Chung, Mr. Chen Han Pan, Mr. Chan Kim Po, Mr. Tony Dare, Mr. Ip Kok Him, Mr. Chan Hak Kan, Mr. Frankie Yik. Any abstention? 6 for, 10 against, no abstention. This question is negative. The next question is whether or not this committee agrees to handle motion 66 moved by Mr. Gary Fan under Rule 32A. Chairman, I claim a division. In accordance with Rule 32A of the PWSC procedure, I, Gary Fan, move this motion, which is seconded by Mr. Albert Chan. This committee urges the government to, in or before 2017, implement a garbage levy before extending Southeast New Territories landfill.
Those in favor, we have Albert Chan, Fernando Cheung, James To, Kenneth Chan, Helena Wong, Gary Fan. We have 6 for. Those against, Alice Mack, Wong Kok Heng, Tam Yu Chung, Chan Hang Ban, Elizabeth Quat, Chen Kin Po, Tony Che, Yup Kok Hyun, Chan Hak Kan, Frankie Yek. Abstention. So we have 6 for, 10 against, so the motion is not carried. Next, this committee will need to deal with motion number 67, moved by Gary Fan, pursuant to Section 32A of our Rules and Procedure. Chairman, I'd like to call for division. The bell will ring for 1 minute. Pursuant to Section 32A of the PWSC Rules of Procedure, I, Gary Fan, moves and Albert Chan seconds the motion that we should urge the government to implement the levy on garbage before 2018 before extending the SCNT landfill. All those in favor? Albert Chan, Fernando Cheung, Kenneth Chan, Helena Wong, and Gary Fan. We have 5 for. Those against? Alice Mack, Wong Kok Heng, Tam Yu Chung, Chan Hang Ban, Elizabeth Quat, Chen Kin Po, Tony Che, Yup Kok Hyun, Chan Hak Kan, Frankie Yek. Any abstention? We have 5 for, 10 against, and no abstention. So the motion is not carried. Next, this committee will now deal with motion number 68, moved by Gary Fan, pursuant to 32A of our Rules of Procedure. Chairman, I'd like to call for division. The bell will ring for a minute. Pursuant to Section 32A of the PWSC Rules of Procedure, I, Gary Fan, proposes and Albert Chan seconds the motion that we urge the government to implement the levy on garbage before 2019, before extending the SCNT landfill. See, point of order. I really regret that you agree to accept these motions, which only differ in the timing. I think the President of the Council really made a ruling in respect of this issue. You keep saying that you are being lenient. You are being so lenient to members who are filibustering, but you are not being lenient when it comes to the need that we shouldn't waste time. I think our President has already dealt with amendments of this nature. He has banned the vote on these motions, and you are not, acting in accordance with the ruling of the President. Well, I think these I would. So, if you want to criticize anybody, please criticize me and not the chairman. All right, all those who are in favor? Albert Chan, Fernando Cheung, Kenneth Chan, Gary Fan, and Helena Wong. 5 in favor. Those against?
Mr. Albert Chan, would you please, keep quiet? Wong Kok Hing, Tam Yu Chung, Chanang Ban, Elizabeth Quad, Chen Kin Bo, Tony Chair, Yip Kok Him, Chanakan, and Frankie Yek. Any abstention? So we have 5-4, 10 against, and no abstention. The motion is not carried. Next, this committee will need to deal with motion number 69, moved by Gary Fan, pursuant to Section 32A. Chairman, I'd like to call for a division. Okay, the bell will ring for a minute. In accordance with Section 32A of the PWSC Rules of Procedure, I, Gary Fan, moves and Albert Chen seconds the motion that would urge the government to implement the levy on garbage before 2020, before extend the SNT landfill. All those in favor? Albert Chan, Fernando Zhang, Kenneth Chen, Helena Wong, and Gary Fan. 5-4. Those against? Alice Mack, Wong Kok Hing, Tam Yu Chung, Chanang Ban, Elizabeth Quad, Tony Che, Chen Kim Bo, Yip Kok Him, Chen Hak Kan, Frankie Yek. Any abstention? None. So 5-4, 10 against, and no abstention. So the motion is not carried. Next, Chairman. Point of procedure is now 12:45. I've already said that I intend to extend the meeting by 50 minutes. I think you should consult with members. I think the Chairman has the power. Originally, we were scheduled to finish 12:30. So I'd like to call for a division. Okay, the bell will ring for 1 minute. Pursuant to Section 32A of the PWSC Rules of Procedure, I, Gary Fan, moves and Albert Chen seconds that we should urge the government to, within the next 24 months, take back half the number of garbage bins in Hong Kong and learn from the example of Korea and Taiwan that is not placing any garbage bins on the streets in order to reduce the incentive for people to create waste before we extend the SNT landfill. Those in favor? We have Albert Chan, Fernando Zhang, Wuchi Wai, Kenneth Chen, and Gary Fan in favor. 5 in total. Those against? Alice Mack, Wong Kok Hing, Tam Yu Chung, Chanang Ban, Elizabeth Quad, Chen Kin Bo, Tony Chair, Yip Kok Him, Chanakan, and Frankie Yek. Any abstentions? So 4-4, 10 against, no abstentions, so this motion is not carried. Next, this committee agrees to deal with motion number 71 pursuant to Section 32A of our Rules of Procedure. Chairman, I'd like to call for a division. And here, I would like you to clarify one word which we cannot read very clearly. The bell will ring for a minute, but could you clarify the Chinese word there where you have left a blank? It should be 確保 in Chinese. Yes. Chairman, Pursuant to Section 32A of the Rules of Procedure of the PWSC, I, Gary Fan, moves Albert Chen's second motion that which urge the government to, in the next 48 months, ensure that we can achieve the target of reducing waste by 40% according to the resource recycling blueprint before we extend the SNT landfill. All those in favor? Albert Chen, Wu Chi-wai, Fernando Cheung, Kenneth Chan, Gary Fan. We have 5 in favor. Those against? Alice Mack, Wong Kok Hing, Tam Yu Chung, Chan Hang Ban, Elizabeth Quat, Chen Kin Bo, Tony Che, Yip Kok Hyun, Chan Hak Kan, and Frankie Yek. Any abstention? 5 for, 10 against, and no abstention, so the motion is not carried. Next, we need to deal, the committee agrees to deal with motion number 72 moved by Gary Fan pursuant to Section 32A. Chairman, I'd like to call for a division. Pursuant to Section 32A of the PWSC Rules of Procedure, I, Gary Fan, moves Albert Chen's second motion that which I urge the government to undertake to, in the next 60 months, ensure that we can achieve the target of reducing waste by 40% according to the resource recycling blueprint before we extend the NTSC SNT landfill. Those in favor? Albert Chan, Fernando Cheung, Kenneth Chan, Helena Wong, and Gary Fan. 5. Those against? Alice Mack, Wong Kok Hing, Tam Yu Chung, Chan Hang Ban, Elizabeth Quat, Chen Kin Bo, Tony Che, Yip Kok Him, Chan Hak Kan, and Frankie Yek. Any abstention? We have 5 for, 10 against the motion, and no abstention, so the motion is not carried. Next, we now deal with motion 73 moved by Gary Fan pursuant to Section 32A. Chairman, I'd like to call for a division. Please read out your motion. Pursuant to Section 32A of the PWSC Rules of Procedure, I, Gary Fan, moves Albert Chen's second motion that which urge the government to undertake to, within the next 72 months, ensure that we achieve the target of waste reduction by 40% according to the resource recycling blueprint before we extend the SNT landfill. I think you've left out the Chinese word "call" in your motion. That's right, Chairman. Those in favor? Albert Chan, Fernando Cheung, James To, Kenneth Chan, Helena Wong, and Gary Fan. 6 in favor. Those against? Alice Mack, Wong Kok Heng, Tam Yu Chung, Chan Hang Ban, Elizabeth Quat, Chen Kin Bo, Tony Che, Yip Kok Him, Chan Hak Kan, and Frankie Yek. Any abstention? 6 for, 10 against, and no abstention, so the motion is not carried. Next, we now will deal with motion number, I think need to point out that this is the same as 0035. In 0035, you talk about 3 years. Here you say 36 months. So we'll not deal with this motion. Next, we move on to the next motion. This committee agrees to deal with motion 75, moved by Gary Fan, pursuant to section 32A. Chairman, allow me to call for division. Bell will ring for a minute. Pursuant to section 32A of the PWSC Rules of Procedure, I, Gary Fan, moves and Albertson seconds the motion that we should urge the government to, in the next 48 months, announce and review the progress of the resource recycling blueprint before extending the SCNT landfill. Those in favor? Albert Chan, Fernando Zhang, James Toh, Kenneth Chen, Helena Wong, and Gary Fan. We have 6-4. Those against? Alice Mack, Wong Kok Heng, Tam Yu Chung, Chanam Bun, Elizabeth Quat, Chen Kim Bo, Tony Chair, Yu Kok Him, Chen Hak Kan, and Frankie Yik. Any abstention? 6-4, 10 against, so the motion is not carried. Next, we come to 76. Well, this is the same as motion 75, so we'll not deal with it. It's a duplication. Next, we move on to 0077. This committee agrees to deal with motion 77, moved by Gary Fan, pursuant to section 32A. Chairman, I'd like to call for division. The bell will ring for a minute. Please read out your motion. Pursuant to section 32A of the PWSC Rules of Procedure, I, Gary Fan, moves and Albert Chen seconds the motion that we should urge the government to undertake by way of a compulsory, segregation of recycled waste so that the extended SCNT landfill will not be used for more than 5 years before we extend the SCNT landfill.
Those
in favor? Albert Chan, Fernando Zhang, James Toh, Kenneth Chen, Helena Wong, and Gary Fan. 6 in total. Those against? Alice Mack, Wong Kok Heng, Tam Yu Chung, Chanang Bun, Elizabeth Quat, Chen Kim Bo, Tony Chair, Yu Kok Him, Chana Keung, and Frankie Yik. Any abstention? 6-4, 10 against, so the motion is not carried. The next item is that this motion agrees to deal with motion number 78, moved by Gary Fan, pursuant to section 32A. Chairman, I'd like to call for a division. Pursuant to section 32A of the PWSC Rules of Procedure, I, Gary Fan, moves Albert Chen seconds that we should urge the government undertake by way of compulsory segregation of waste to reduce the disposal of waste so that the extended SCNT landfill will not need to operate for more than 4 years before we extend the SCNT landfill.
贊成嘅委員請舉手。
Those in favour? Albert Chan, James Toh, Fernando Zhang, Gary Fan, Kenneth Chan, Helena Wong, 6 in total. Those against? Alice Mack, Wong Kok Hing, Tam Yu Chung, Chanang Ban, Elizabeth Kwok, Chen Kin Bo, Tony Che, Yu Kok Him, Chen Hak Kan, Smartphone Kwok, and Frankie Yip. Any abstention? 6 for, 11 against, and no abstentions, so this motion is not carried. I now declare time is up for us to adjourn, so we will reconvene on the 21st of May at 8:30.